Hello. Today I am going to talk about the global issue that wealth is largely a perception, and in reality, we are all equally subject to misfortune. This global issue is seen in Down and Out in London and Paris, and then also in Oedipus Rex. And in Orwell's Down and Out in Paris and London, he demonstrates that regardless of wealth or class, social and economic problems exist for all. And this is seen in the prosperous cities at the time of the early 1900s in London and Paris. And although they were prosperous cities, there were still high amounts of poverty in those cities. And so in this book by Orwell, the clothes are used symbolically, and they show Orwell's societal change as he experiences going from being a super high, being from a super high class and then going down to lower and lower classes. And he, in the clothes, in one part, he has to pawn his coat in order to get food. And so it just shows how the clothes represented that he was rich and that he had a wealthy background. But once he got rid of those clothes because he needed food and he was poor, he was viewed differently, but in reality, he was still the same person. So even though he went down in class and even though his clothes changed to where people noticed that he was of a different class, he was still the same person, and he was still had the same fate. And so the change in the clothes represented the economic hardship at the time. And then also Orwell, it's a memoir, so it uses dialogue that allows the reader to experience the human interaction that he lived through, which creates a great sense of realism. And this allows a reader who is looking from an outside point of view to understand the hardships and the kind of change in societal or social class that was present in these cities, even though they were prosperous, because they still had a ton of poor areas. And additionally, the juxtapositions of Orwell's previous status to his original rich status, to his poor status, and then his even poorer status, causes a realization that the cycle of poverty is a real thing, and that it is the fate for most common people that lived in these cities, who had a super wealthy class, but then a super poor class at the same time. And additionally, as Orwell visits London and Paris, his status continued to get poorer and poorer until the very end, where he attempted to solve his economic hardships. And as he tried to attempt this, new problems arose, and all he could do was figure out how to make the most of each and every problem and situation that he was dealt with. And so the main takeaway from Orwell's experience is that through the different classes and through the changes of the classes that was shown through the symbolism of the clothing, he was still subject to the harsh reality of the world and the misfortune that he endured, and that he learned at the end that he had to make the most of every problem, and that he can't just kind of like go with it and complain about it, I guess. Like, he has to act on what a situation is. And likewise in Oedipus Rex, it's very similar in the sense that Oedipus was still subject to misfortune, but it's in the opposite way, because Oedipus was the king of Thebes, which was a super prosperous city in Greece, in ancient Greece. And so Sophocles in Oedipus Rex uses personification and the multiple viewpoints provided via the chorus to demonstrate how, although Oedipus is perceived as the great king of Thebes, he was equally subject to the misfortune as the people that he ruled over. And so, and the features that Oedipus used to convey this was personification of time, and then also the different viewpoints of the strophe and the antistrophe that kind of clashed throughout the play. And so Oedipus, some background about him, he was born into a powerful family, and he was supposed to be this great king, and he also solved a riddle, or the riddle of the Sphinx, which everyone viewed him as this famous and very intelligent person. And so from the outside, he had a perception that he was really wealthy, powerful, and an intelligent and well-off person. But in reality, he was cursed from the beginning of his life with the misfortune that was the Oedipus complex. And this misfortune just shows that even though he seemed to, even though he was at the top and was the wealthiest, he was still subject to the misfortune provided by the nature of his world. And so in the excerpt that I used for Oedipus, time was used to show, or it was used to represent the fairness that is nature, and that everyone is equally subject to misfortune, and that kind of like the time kind of sought out Oedipus and caused them to have a poor fate, and there's nothing that Oedipus could have done about it. And additionally, the strophe or the antistrophe kind of portrayed Oedipus as this great king and as this powerful and insightful person, and the strophe used rhetorical questions that kind of counteract what the antistrophe was saying, and they used those rhetorical questions that kind of show how Oedipus's life was very unjust and that he had a lot going against him. And towards the end of the book, when Oedipus was basically about to die, he finally realized that he had to, similar to Orwell, he had to accept his fate and then act on it. But for Oedipus, it was too late. So he finally realized that, and he didn't want his daughters to go through the same thing that he went through. And so both of these texts exemplify the global issue that is that wealth is mostly perception, and that in reality everyone's equally subject to misfortune. And so this global issue is explored through time and space. And so both Orwell's Down and Out in Paris and London, that occurred in the 1900s, and then also Oedipus Rex occurred in ancient Greece. But in the same, even though those were centuries apart, the global issue remained true. Was the global issue remained true to where even if you were the wealthiest person or even if you're the poorest person, you're still equally subject to the nature of the world. But at the same time, you also still have the opportunity to act on your situation. And so the time and space where these occurred completely different places and completely different times just shows that this is a prevalent issue in our society. And even today, like with the pandemic and stuff, we have to act on our situations rather than just endure them. Hey, that's